Hello folks, and welcome to the channel, or welcome back. And in this video we're going to continue to work on the TVR, and it's probably one of the last ones in trying to get this engine running in top condition again for now. There's still a lot of body work to be done, but you'll see that in coming videos. But in this video we're going to install the new radiator and the new swirl pot. We'll hook it all up and then we'll fill the engine with new cooling liquid and see if we can crank it up. So the first thing we're going to do is to install a new swirl pot, and this is a stainless steel swirl pot, not exactly the same as the original one, especially around the tube area, but that's okay. We can fit it already pre-connected the hose to it because we're going to install it very soon. Now this was the old swirl pot. This is a steel one, and it was really pitted over here. You have seen this in the previous video. So this tube was really gone. So I could have built a new swirl pot, but at the end I didn't. I went for a stainless steel version. But that's not the only thing we will have to do, of course, because one of the issues on this car is that it has electrical fans to aid the cooling. And we want to trigger this with a system, and a system that we can adjust. And that's why the old TVR solutions, as I've seen here from Kenlo, was having Kenlo fans in the front of the car and then have a kind of a thermostat with a sensor that fits into the cooling liquid. And then you can actually adjust when the fans are kicking in. Now typically what people used to do, they would bring the thermostat in like so, and then it would come out, bend over the corner, and it would be a rubber. Now I don't like this at all, so I'm going to make a modification. What I'm going to do is to make sure that I can actually feed the thermostat from the top cover like so, but that means I will have to modify my top cover. Now I did order a new top cover. This is the top cover, which is normally completely sealed off, so there's no pressure relief valve on this. So we'll have to modify this, and I'll explain you that in a few minutes on how we're going to modify this, and you will see how I modify it. But now let's have a look on the radiator itself. And here we have the radiator, which is completely reconditioned. That means that we have a brand new core in the middle, and the core that's been put in is a high efficiency core. So it's far more dense and it provides much better cooling. They recommended this new core, and this is a very high efficiency but also very strong core. The horizontal lines, these are the channels going from left to right, and the vertical ones are just the cooling fins, but you can see how many channels we have, far more. And also in the depth there are more channels. You can also see that the channels are recessed from the cooling fins, so that protects it a bit. So if you have a small impact, it's first going to hit the cooling fins before it's going to hit the channel. So now the question is, why did I go for a brass radiator and not an aluminum version? Why did I not go for a full-size radiator and stick to the original half-size, which was fitted typically on the TVR 3000s, and they are kind of known for having cooling issues? Well, it's a long story, but I did investigate a lot on this. I looked at new aluminum radiators and I couldn't tell where they came from. They ranged in price a lot, and some of them were cheap, some of them were more expensive, and they all looked the same on the pictures on the web store. So I wasn't sure at all, and based on previous experience with some of these stores, I decided not to buy one immediately. So I went to my local radiator shop, and this guy does nothing else than fixing radiators, and I did ask him the question, what should I do? Should I get a new brass radiator? Should I get a new aluminum radiator? Should I actually get mine rebuilt? And the answer of the guy said, like, get yours rebuilt. You have a copper one or a brass type radiator, I can replace the complete core with a high efficiency modern core, which will guarantee you very good performance on cooling. And it will be just like a new one. So I did. I told them, okay, fine, that's good for me. Now obviously a brass radiator is heavy. So if you really are concerned about weight, then go for an aluminum version. A brass radiator is easy to repair. An aluminum one is far more difficult to repair. And price-wise, they're about the same. I paid for mine about 300 euros, and that's everything inclusive, taxes and all that, and it's been fully tested. So I think this is not too bad, and now I have a good quality, high-performant radiator in its original size. Now, other people claim that an aluminum radiator is better in cooling than a brass one. Well, some people then say, no, brass is better. But reality is that brass is in essence better for cooling efficiency because it transfers heat a lot better. However, when it's been built, they solder things together in the core to the cover, and wherever you have soldered brass on brass, then you have losses in the heat conduction. So that's why a brass radiator is less efficient in terms of transferring heat through the whole body. Aluminum is a lot better. When the aluminum radiator is built, there is no solder involved. Everything is kind of mended or melded together through a chemical process, and that what makes it one block of aluminum, which is of course now better for cooling. So I think in terms of efficiency, both are more or less the same now. Maybe the aluminum one is a little bit better. But then again, the aluminum radiator is having some other issues, and they have some weak points. Wherever the channels connect to the actual plate or the cover plate, they need to stick through an aluminum panel, and that's chemically bonded together. And that's what you see often in these points. You see these white deposits, and that's where they start leaking, and there is no way you can actually fix this. So I decided at the end, well, let's get my brass radiator completely rebuilt with a brand new core, high efficiency. I don't worry too much about the weight. So now let's go and install this radiator into the car and then start looking on these fans, because we still need to work on those guys and see how that's going to work. So I have two fans fitted behind the radiator, and the radiator would normally be right here. And they turn in a certain direction. In fact, they need to turn counterclockwise. There's an arrow on these fans, so they need to turn like this. In other words, they will scoop in air and then suck it through the radiator into the engine compartment. So we're getting driving air coming in, but they will aid in sucking that air in, so the cooling efficiency becomes better. Now these are driven by a thermostat switch. We'll talk about that later. But I don't know if these fans are working or not, and in which direction they should run. Now there's cables hanging on those. Here is that cable. And I can't tell which one is positive, which one is negative, because depending on the polarity, they will turn left or right. So I'm going to try to figure that out, which way they should turn, by connecting a small power supply or a battery to it, and then see which way it goes. Now I have seen some of them have a mark on it. It looks like a minus, but then again, I am not sure if that is a minus. So let's see. So I don't know what these connectors are, and then we probably need to fix those anyway and put some new ones up. But let's see which way these fans are running and if they still run. And once we got that sorted out, then we can mark these cables properly. I have a battery over here, which I connected up to a positive lead, and I don't know which one is the positive, but let's see. I'm going to connect it underneath so we don't have an issue. And normally I wouldn't do it like this, but since I can't get to it otherwise, because otherwise I can't show it to you guys, I will do it like this. And then this is the negative lead, and now I can hook it up to the fan and see what the fan will do. So let's see. So the fan turns anti-clockwise, which is good. So that should actually suck in this paper. So now I know that the polarity is correct. If I was to do it the other way around, I'm just changing the wires now, guys. Oops. Make this a little bit stronger. If I was to reconnect it, but the other way around, then the fan will probably work in the other direction. So let's see. So now it actually blows out, see? So I know for sure now that the negative side is the one which has no marking on the cable. The positive one is the one with the marking on. So this is important. So if you're going to check your fans, make sure they run in the proper direction. And if you don't remember where everything is in terms of polarity on it, that's an easy check with a battery. This cable comes from the relay for the fans, and I made two different cables for that, and I put them together so we have now two sockets. So I have some heat shrink, so I'm going to shrink that now. All right. So now we're going to install the radiator, and for that one we have some grommets on the bottom side and a bolt on the top. And once the radiator is in, there will be pins going through it, and then we need to put a split pin underneath and a washer. So let's do that. Right. Well, let's see. All right. So that's fitted properly. Okay. So that looks good. Put the bolt in. Okay. Nope, I have a bit of, that's better. Checking the fans if they're not hitting anything, because you don't want the fans to hit anything, so you can adjust the radiator a little bit up and down. So see, like this. So I just wanted to make sure that it doesn't hit anything. I guess we should be good. So all I need to do now is put the split pins up and some washers, and then we are done with this part. So now we have the radiator secured in place. So I placed the swirl pot into place, and I hooked up the hose to the radiator housing. We still need to tighten it up. Same thing over here on the swirl pot. And then on the bottom side of the swirl pot, the tube is going to the radiator. But first of all, I'm going to bolt down the swirl pot, and then we tighten up all the tubes. All right, so here we have the hose going to the radiator. Not too hard, because this is copper, so I don't want to destroy anything. Let's see if we have sufficient play here on the fans, and that looks good. All right, now I'm not going to over tighten this. I might retighten it once the engine has been running and see if we have any leaks. If it drips a little bit or it sweats, then we're going to tighten it a bit more. Now to fit the hose, which is going back to the water pump, that is a bit tricky, because if the suspension is hanging down, the steering rod here is a bit in the way to properly fit it. So what I've done is I pulled up the suspension to some extent to get easy access to that. So now I can actually put it on very easily. What I like to do for this job is spray some acid-free Vaseline on it, so that makes it slide so much better. Without having to force things. Of course, if you have easy access, it's different, but in this case, it's a bit tricky to get to it. So, so let's see if we can actually fit this. All right, and now I need to install it on the water pump side. So let's try and move this in. And that goes on, as you can see, very smoothly with a little bit of Vaseline. Now that we have the radiator in place, we have the swirl pot in place, we connected all the hoses up and we tightened them all down, except two little hoses that go on the top of the swirl pot. One is going to the front of the radiator and the other one is going to the overflow tank, but we'll do that later as soon as we have the fender in and we can actually mount the overflow tank. But now we need to do something else. We need to have the thermostat installed, which is the can-load thermostat, which is having a sensor that senses the temperature of the water and then drives the fans that we've been checking before. Now, that can-load unit is a very old-fashioned method, but it works pretty well. It's nothing more than a container with some alcohol or ether, I think. And when it gets warmer, it evaporates, and then there's a pressure contact inside, higher up, that will make contact and it will kick in the fans. And you can actually adjust it when that happens. But for that, I need to have the sensor going inside the swirl pot. Now, there is no opening foreseen for that. Most of the time, people feed it in through the side here, in between the metal and the hose coming from the thermostat housing. But I don't like that too much. This is how it was done, and I've been told that's how people do it. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to modify the cap here on the swirl pot, and I'm going to put the sensor in this way. I think this will be a lot better. This is what we're going to build. We have the cap, which is this part right here, and in that we drill a hole, and through that hole we will actually install a copper tube. So that will go through the cap, and then at the bottom of the tube we will have a stop. So I'll make sure that no water can get in, so we will have to solder on a stop like so. And then we can actually slide inside this tube, we can slide in the sensing probe. So in other words, when this cap is going to be put onto the swirl pot, like so, we'll have all hot water around it. It will warm up this copper tube, and of course the sensing unit inside will then warm up as well. Will we have a lot of loss of heat transfer? I don't think so. This is actually copper or brass, and I might actually fill it up with some oil inside, so that it doesn't jiggle around and we have no wear and tear on the probe itself. And on the top we actually have a rubber where the tube is fitting through, but freely, so we can still turn open and close the cap. So this is what we're going to make. So I removed the rubber on the cap, and now we need to drill a hole right in the middle, the size of this tube, so we can actually solder in this tube. Now the diameter of this tube is, let's see, so this is 15 mil. So let's drill a hole into the cap of 15 mil, and then we can put the tube in. So we're going to, first of all, solder the top on. And this is some soldering liquid, which always helps for soldering. Alright, so let's put the top part up. And now we are going to give it a bit of gas and heat it up. So this is now the cover of the swirl pot. We have soldered in this tube, so the sensor will go in on the top, and we still have to close up the tube on the bottom so no water can get in. Alright, so here is what we built. This is the tube that will go inside. This is now a completely closed tube, so it's sealed off. And on the top I have a rubber with a little hole where the sensor will come through, and of course inside we'll have the sensor. Now that's going to go in like this and locked. Of course I still have to put the rubber up, and then we can actually insert the probe, and that's all there is to it. So I placed the rubber seal in the bottom because that's important, and now we can fit it up and twist it. So now I can actually fit the probe. I have the sensor, I have the contact already mounted. I'm going to put a little bit of oil in this tube so that the sensor here is not going to rattle. All right. So let's see if we can. I put the rubber on already, so let's see if we can get it in. And this is going very smoothly. So I have installed the overflow tank and hooked it all up with the same hoses as the rest of the car, and I had to install, of course, the inner fender on the right hand side to install the overflow tank. So the can low adjustment is fitted right underneath the spare wheel. So with this one we will be able to adjust the temperature by which the fans are kicking in. I still need to connect the cables in the back. I haven't done that, but they are laying around here, so that's just a matter of hooking it up. So we're about ready now to fill up the engine with new cooling liquid. And we will bring in the cooling liquid through a vacuum mechanism. So the hose here you see is connected to the overflow tank, which is now sealed off. And the hose here will actually suck vacuum out of the cooling system of the engine, and actually we'll see the vacuum coming in here. And then once the vacuum is created, then we'll change the valves here, and then we're going to start sucking in cooling liquid through this hose on the bottom. So I'm just going to start sucking vacuum now. Open up the gate. And now I'm sucking air out of the cooling system of the car. I'm going to let it run until we have the maximum deflection. Still in the green, I don't want to go into the orange or the red part. And if you look on the hoses, you can see how they are now being pinched together because of the vacuum. So I'm going to block it and now open up the suction now, and now you see we are actually sucking in cooling liquid into the engine itself. And we let it cycle until everything is filled up. If you can't get it done in one go, then do it again. But now you're going to get some cooling liquid coming out of the second vacuum. But you can hear the air bubbles in the engine now being sucked out. I don't know if you can hear the air bubbles, but there's plenty of air bubbles inside the engine block and in the cooling system that is now being sucked out. And you have some vapor coming out, but that's because you get some liquid with it. Not a lot though. There we go. And now we fill up the block again. And I've made a mark on my cooling reservoir, so this is about 10 liters, a little bit more, because the total is 20 liters. So it looks like we've got almost 12 liters into the engine, and this is about what we should get. Okay, so the car is now fully filled up, so I can remove the tool. All the cooling liquid is now in the engine, so now I'm going to do a little pressure test on the system to see if we have any leaks anywhere. We might have some of these spanners that are not properly tied together. You never know, so it's always good to do a leak test. So you've seen the leak test before once we check the engine, and we're going to do it the same way. So I'm going to hook that up, and then I'm going to pump it up until I have about 13 psi, because that's the pressure that actually we release things here. So let me pump. Okay, so there we are, and I can hear a little leak on the side here. The pressure is holding up fairly all right. So let me check that out. So the engine is now filled up with fresh cooling liquid. So now we can give it a try and see if it's going to start. Carburetor is not tuned. The ignition is probably not tuned properly so far. I left it as it is, more or less correct. So let's see if we can get it started. And then once we get it started, I'm going to start checking the tuning on the carburetor and on the ignition and all the rest. And then recheck the valve clearance, because that's something else we'll have to do. Alright, so let's see if we can get it started. This is not handy to get in when it's on the lift, but let's give it a try. Not sure if it's going to work, but but we can only try. Well, that seems to work. And I got a good oil pressure, that's good. Water temperature, of course, is low, and everything else seems to work fine, and the engine runs fairly smoothly. So yeah, I'm happy with that. We still have to tune it though. All right. Oh, this is terrible to get out when the car is on the lift. So it ran pretty smooth and it started reasonable well. I had to crank it a little bit. So now I'm going to start tuning it. So it's going to work just perfectly. So we have come to the end of this video, and the further tuning will be in another video because it's getting pretty late. You all have a good night. Bye-bye.